In this video, we're going to talk about the final method in the Battleship player class. We've already talked about the high chips method and the go method. Those are the primary methods that are going to be useful in your class. There is one more method that you can use in your solution, and that's the reset method. If we look at the Battleship tester class where it runs the main algorithm, you can see that the reset method gets called once for each of the games that we play. So right before we start a new game, it always calls the reset method. That doesn't get called in between the individual turns in the array, but does get called at the beginning of each game. So that can be really useful if you want to reset information so that you start like at a specific point. Like remember how last time we coded up those instance variables, row and column, and set them to 0? That's going to happen just once whenever you create the Battleship player object. So that happens once before all the gameplay starts in the main program. And then we used our high chips method to set up our board, and we used our go method, and we had this really silly algorithm where we first fired at square 0, 0, and then the next time through we fired at square 5, 5. Let's run the program for multiple games just to see what happens. So I'm going to uncomment out my for loop that's in the main program. Did I already uncomment it out loud? I think maybe. All right, so let's go ahead and try to run that. Oh, nope, I do still have the comment in there. Excellent. Thank goodness for the compiler, right? All right, so now I ran the program and we're playing 3 games. Each game's just going to have 2 turns in it so that we can kind of visually track all the information. So here's the initial game board setup. And then in step number 1, I'm firing at square 0, 0. Step number 2, I fired at square 5, 5. And then it shows that I'm starting a new game. This is the next game. It has the same game board because I didn't do anything fancy that allows me to toggle between 2 different choices or more than 2 choices. So I'm starting with the same game board here. And then next up in my solution, you can see the first thing it does is fire at square 5, 5. So maybe that's fine, but maybe I wanted it to go back to square 0, 0. If I wanted it to go back to square 0, 0 at the beginning of each game, then I could use the reset method to make that happen. So I could do something like reset the row to be 0 and the column to be 0 so that I start back at that top left position at the beginning of each game. So let's see how the behavior is different now that I've made that change. So again, I'm running my program. It's running 3 games, and each game just has 2 turns in it. So this is my initial game board. Now I'm firing at square 0, 0 as my first turn, square 5, 5 as my second turn. Then this next group of output, that's my initial game board for game 2. And I'm starting at square 0, 0 again, and then moving to square 5, 5 as my second turn. And then this last group of output, this is my initial game board for game number 3. And then I'm taking a shot at square 0, 0, and then a shot at square 5, 5. So you can see that now each time that I play a new game, it starts with that same sequence of attacks. So if there's anything you need to do in your algorithm to reset information about the row and column, or if you are keeping like a 2-dimensional array where you track information about what data comes back from your fire at method calls, then you could reset that so that it's all empty and you don't know anything about the initial game board there. You could use reset for a lot of different things, but those are some of the more common things that people frequently use the reset method for. It's not going to be a large method. It's probably just going to have a few lines of code in it where you reset the value of data fields that are part of the Battleship player class so that they have good initial values that you would want them to have at the beginning of a game. It's also possible that you don't need to reset anything in here. If you don't need to reset any data fields and you just want them to kind of pick up where they left off, that's completely fine too. And you would just make a note of that in here as a comment saying no data fields need to be reset. and that would be a completely valid solution for project number 4. So at this point, we've talked about all the different methods that are part of your Battleship player file. Remember, this is the only file that you need to edit for the project. If you make edits to any of the other files that are part of the project, then it won't compile with the final version that were used for the tournament. And so you won't be able to play against other people in our course. There's 4 things that you need to do. You need to add some data fields. You're probably going to need at least a row and column that help you move across the game board. In your hide chips method, you want to have at least 2 game boards that you toggle back and forth between, and we talked about some algorithms for how you might make that happen. In your go method, you have to call the fire at method and do some sort of update to the row and column so you're not always firing at the same square. And then finally, your reset method, you can use that optionally for any data fields that need to be reset before a new game begins.